Greetings. Welcome to SimEx QuickDraft. This tool helps you to draft your SimEx content, giving you more time to tailor the material to specific scenarios and learning outcomes. Hope you have fun in the process. Now when you open this file, you might see a message something like this: security warning, macros have been disabled. In order to use the app, you're going to have to enable the content, or else the buttons won't work. The first thing you're going to do is to click this box, and by clicking this box will take you to a draft SimEx timetable. You'll work through this from top to bottom by either deselecting content you do not wish to include or editing the sample content suggested. Whilst the materials are spread over 3 days, day 0, 1 and 2, there is no need to run this full SimEx. Simply select the content you would like to use from the 3-day selection and then consolidate into the time that you have planned for. Now before we click this box, it's worth pointing out a couple of icons here. There's one for acronyms, as some of these are used within the materials. There's also a button to delete your selection. This returns everything to the default of yes. And we have another little icon of Buster, which will take you to the Buster website, the NGO App Warehouse website, where you can download updated versions of this app. Great, so let's click the box and move forward. So as promised, this takes us to the SimEx timetable, beginning with day 0. Now, this is just a classic SimEx timetable. We start off with the injection code or document code. This guides you through the detailed materials that each of these sections relates to. We have the emergency management systems function. This is basically the job area to which the inject code relates to. The title of the inject, a few more details, some of the expected actions that come out of using the inject that are expected, the delivery mode, who it's addressed to, where it comes from, a location if it's in multiple locations, when the inject should be issued, deadlines for completion, whether it was actually done or not, and who is responsible for seeing it through. All of these boxes you can edit along the way. We also have the select content column, and this is where you decide whether you want to include the content or not. Now the default is always on yes, so basically your job is to deselect the things you don't want to include within your SimEx. We also have at the top here 2 buttons. One is for the full selection, that's the default selection, and then once you start deselecting things, you can filter for your selection. And by clicking this button, you will see that the box becomes green. And this is just to remind you where you're at in terms of the process. So let's return to full selection. We also have a little button here which will take you back to the home screen. And finally, when your SimEx drafting is complete, you would select this button, which I'll show you later. In addition, we've got a button for curveballs. Now, curveballs are those unexpected events that are regular occurrences during emergencies and can significantly impact on what one had planned. Sometimes it's nice to be able to see a full selection of those curveballs so you can decide which ones you would like to include and which ones are most likely to come up in terms of your context. So when I select that, you'll see just a selection of those, and they are shaded in grey and marked as curveball. But you will come across these as you work through the timetable. So let's return to full selection. Great. Now we've got some of the basic functionality out of the way. Let's continue on with the exercise. So we start at the beginning. Basically, we have to set our aims and objectives for the SimEx. And in order to get a range of options to select from, simply click for materials here. And this will give you a range of different options, the type of SimEx that you're going to choose, whether it's a desktop simulation or an external simulation. Also, as one does one's introduction, one needs to present the overall timetable. You can adapt this accordingly. So let's say we want to do a desktop simulation, therefore let's deselect that option above. We can adapt the timetable as already mentioned. Here's a whole range of aims and objectives. These are drawn from experience and materials that are already out there. So let's say, for example, the overall aim of the SimEx is to build the capacity of mid to senior level NGO staff to plan a coordinated multi-agency response to an emergency situation. And then after the SimEx, they should be able to do the following. So we can run through those and select out the ones we do want and don't want. So we decided we're not going to do that one, so I'll deselect that, and we'll take any ones of these that we don't want to include. You see a nice range of different options here that that you can select from. Here's a list of typical tools and materials that are required to run a SimEx, and the kind of venue requirements that have been found to be most appropriate. Not to then forget the different SimEx roles and try to start allocating people who would fit within those functions during the course of the SimEx. Again, an idea of the organizational chart, how these different role players fit together within the overall SimEx management is important, and again you can adapt this organizational chart accordingly. Once you've drafted up that, return to your SimEx timetable. Great, so now we can continue on with planning for our participants. This will take you to a table where you can start drafting out who is going to be coming, and as the planning process continues, options for additional details, such as the application processes and the joining instructions. We can also start adapting and tailoring our SimEx ground rules and frequently asked questions according to our aims and objectives that we've already set. I want you to remember this, these on the left-hand side here, because they relate then back to the Inject detailed materials after I click the appropriate button. So this intro 03 relates back to the timetable, and this is the same as we go through the exercise. So again, we can run through these ground rules and deselect those that we don't want to include. Also remember that if there's things that you need to update, you can also do that. You can edit the content. Some SimEx frequently asked questions that might be appropriate in your context. You can again select in and out those that you would like to include and add additional ones if you like. Let's return to our SimEx timetable and move swiftly on with the planning process. We have here the 0INT, one click for ideas around the background of the disaster and preparedness planning. Again, this gives you some ideas that you can start thinking about. It's good to set the scene of your organization as you go into the SimEx, so the response team knows what they're building on and also knows the background context of the country which we will be simulating. Just before I move on, the background and disaster preparedness planning process, you might like to use the Disaster Risk Reduction and Disaster Preparedness Planning Buster, which can be found on NGO App Warehouse. This knits nice and neatly in with the Early Warning Buster, which you can use in the following section as well. Okay, we're now going to move on to developing our early warning scenario, which is going to drive the rest of this SimEx as we develop it. Now within the SimEx scenario builder, I've given you an option of 5 time periods. You can name each time period as you like. This basically gives you the option to develop an early warning scenario and move it on into an emergency, or to unfold the emergency in the course of the SimEx. In this section, I want to draw your attention to the range of indicators which are listed down the left-hand side. Enough indicators to be suggestive of nearly any hazard you could imagine. beside each of these indicators we have triggers of increasing severity. What you're simply going to do is run through the indicators, choose those ones you want, and then select the trigger that you would like to describe the onset of your scenario. I'd like to point out a couple of features. We have an overall index level, so as you start triggering indicators, you're going to notice that this overall index level is going to move on from normal to watch to warning to emergency to crisis. So as I selected for this one, we moved into watch. This is not going to change so long as we're sticking within watch indicators. But as soon as we move into warning indicators, you're going to see this rise up to warning and then onwards towards emergency. Obviously, the magnitude of emergency is critically important in terms of trying to plan for the scale of the response. So a crucial part to building scenario is also building the population at risk or affected by the hazard. In order to do that, enter in the number of people at risk into this little box here, and we have a neat little tool that helps us to locate where those people are to be found. So here we have an example from DRC. We have taken this from Congo's census statistics. Simply write in the administrative units, the population per administrative unit, and then you can select which areas are going to be affected and calculate numbers either through adding in an estimated percentage of that total population, which will then calculate automatically in this column. Or if you've done surveys or you want to put in absolute numbers, you can add those absolute numbers here, and the number will update at the top here. And then you have a space for writing in notes. This echoes the dashboard that we've just seen by being divided into 5 different time periods that relate to a progression of your emerging scenario. You'll need to manually transfer either this number or the other number into the tool. Again, either use the tool selection or your triggered selection options. This is going to simply bring together all of those areas which we have decided are to be affected within our scenario. And we return back to SimEx Builder, and this takes us to the default of your selection that we have set off. Now remember, there's some triggers that we have set in time period 2, so by selecting your selection, merges together all of those indicators that we have chosen. Now you probably won't want to spoon feed your scenario teams by just giving them the above table. Rather, you'd like to wrap them up into a range of emails, press releases, survey reports that they can then untangle to enter into the early warning tool or whichever other tool they're using. So you can write those materials into the spaces provided below. You can add inject codes or attach documents accordingly. Now we've set the scene in day 0, we're going to move on to developing the injects. Now each of the injects is going to be directed to one of the emergency management system functions, either in programming, response management, communications, finance, logistics, human resource management, and they're all going to be supplied with different emails, different information, different phone calls, which they then have to act on as the emergency unfolds. So you're simply going to run through the timetable and decide whether this is content you want to keep in your SimEx or not. What you're going to do to get additional details beyond the simple summary here is to select the button within the colored area. Remember to take note of the inject codes, because this code relates back to the timetable one, and here we can see the content of the material that is going to be supplied to the various teams. Now you can either choose to keep it or select it out of the tool If indeed you do keep it, well, then you can edit it. The beauty with the tool is that you can see all of the content pertaining to each of the functions with one overview, and this way you can track the flow of the simulation materials as the exercise continues. This also makes it very easy to adjust and edit the content as well. So once we're happy with that, let's return to the SimEx timetable, and we can move on to, let's say, for example, comms. Once we've looked through the basic content here, maybe we decide at the outset that we don't want to include this. And that takes it out of the SimEx. And so we continue in exactly the same way through the whole of day 1 into day 2, clicking backwards and forwards, checking up the content, and returning to the SimEx timetable. Just remember that you can always check out what the full selection is in your selection here by using those 2 buttons. So this gives us a nice consolidated list of all the materials that we've been working on, and it directs us back to the materials in a consolidated way. So I already showed you how to consolidate your chosen materials within the SimEx timetable. Here you see that it's green on. You can either copy and paste this into a separate document, or you can continue to edit it within the SimEx QuickDraft tool that you have been working with. We can move on to looking at the consolidated scenario materials. So this gives you the indicators and triggers that you selected and a range of materials that you have developed to provide the teams. The population scenario materials, very similar to the trigger materials. Again, this brings us to a list of the population breakdown and the areas that you've selected to be affected by the onset of the hazard. Of absolute importance, the SimEx Injects. So this gives you a consolidated list of all of those materials that you've kept in the SimEx, and it has filtered out those that you've removed. Finally, there's the participants list, which is very simply the people you're going to be bringing in to conduct and participate in the exercise. And this concludes our co-creation experience. I trust it's going to be the best learning experience ever. Thank you for your time.